Hello, my lovely anatomist and physiologist, Michele Glass here, and we are ready to start talking about the cardiovascular system. And we have several chapters covering this material. So make sure that you're looking at your chapter 18 to begin in your OpenStax textbook. Remember, the link is in the video description. And we're going to start our conversation with blood. So we're going to start our conversation with blood. So let's begin with what would be the job? What would be the job or the functions of blood? And one thing that, I always teach when I first start talking about cardiovascular system way back in anatomy and physiology part 1, I always say the job of the cardiovascular system is to transport. And it is the job of the blood specifically to transport. So we can talk about it as delivering oxygen gas. We can talk about it as delivering nutrients. We can see that it's going to be delivering hormones to our tissues. And we now have a better understanding of the job of hormones after our study of the endocrine system. We also see as part of this transportation that the blood is going to be removing carbon dioxide gas and what we can collectively talk about as metabolic wastes from our tissues. So we see that the blood is delivering oxygen, nutrients, and hormones to our tissues, but then picking up carbon dioxide gas and other waste products. We can talk about the blood as offering protection to the body. And here we can talk about like 2 different types of protection. So one would be from blood loss. So we'll see that it's going to be incorporated into the blood tissue itself, this mechanism to form blood clots. So we'll be talking about that in more detail. And we also see that we're getting protection here from pathogens. So some of our important immune cells are going to be part of the blood. We also see the role of the blood in distributing heat. Now this we should be able to connect from our study of autonomic nervous system. So we know that when we're in that sympathetic division, fight, flight, freeze sort of response, that we talked about our blood being channeled, redistributed, that's probably the better term, to our extremities. And part of that is, of course, we need to provide the oxygen and nutrients and so forth to our skeletal muscle for the fight, flight, freeze response. But the other part of that is we are getting ready to do a lot of physical activity and generate a lot of heat. And so we do need to get that heat to the surface of our body. And then we'll see if conditions are cold, the blood will leave our extremities and go to our internal organs to maintain the critical organs that keep us alive. And then we can also just sort of, in general terms, talk about maintaining homeostasis. We see that connection with the distribution of heat. But we also see that we're maintaining chemical balance in the blood. And this includes like our pH. This includes our fluid. And you can't really talk about balancing fluid without also talking about balancing electrolytes, which are essentially our ions. And so we'll see that as an important job here as well. When we talk about blood, it's important to also remember that it is a connective tissue. So it is a tissue that you should have studied in your anatomy and physiology part 1, chapter 4, when you studied tissues as part of your lab work. And when we talk about connective tissues, when I teach about connective tissues, I always say there's 2 important components. One is the specialized cell, and the other is the extracellular matrix. And so when we talk about connective tissues, we should keep in mind that we're going to have both specialized cells. And in this case, we're going to actually talk about them as formed elements. And we're going to also get our extracellular matrix in the form of the plasma. So we'll be talking about each one of these. Now, when we talk about the formed elements, we are including here what we can call red blood cells, or RBCs. We're going to be talking about what we call white blood cells, or WBCs. And then we're going to be talking about platelets. And the reason that these are described as formed elements instead of that specialized cell is because we'll see a mature red blood cell has really no organelles. And we'll see that a platelet is actually a cell fragment. And so red blood cells and platelets are not cells like we talked about way back in chapter 3. What white blood cells are cells like we're used to thinking and talking about. But because the red blood cells and the platelets technically kind of have lost a lot of that cellular function, we talk about these as formed elements. Now we'll see that when we talk about blood, the formed elements collectively are making up about 37 to 54% of the whole blood. So the formed elements are composing about 37 to 54% of the whole blood. And here, you know, I don't actually want to memorize this range. What I want to memorize is the formed elements are a little less than half of the overall blood. So for me, I really want to know that the formed elements are a little less than half of the whole blood. So that means the plasma is making up 46 to 63%, or we can say the plasma is a little more than half of the whole blood. And what we'll see is the plasma is mostly water, and we'll have some proteins, and we're going to keep the formed elements suspended. So it's a fluid. And we're going to talk about more details on this in just a little bit of time. Now, if you were to collect like a drop of blood, we would see like, I'm going to put it over here. So we're going to do drop of blood in this kind of pinkish color. And if you were to have a drop of blood, you would see about 4.8 to about 5.4 million red blood cells in that drop of blood. And then when we look at our white blood cells, we'll see like thousands of white blood cells in that drop of blood. And then I don't actually have a number for how many platelets, but it's probably kind of closer to the white blood cell, definitely, than the red blood cell. So we are going to see that in the formed elements, the red blood cell is going to be the most abundant. So we'll be talking about that one quite a lot. The other thing that I want to talk about here in this video is if we took a sample of blood and we put it in a test tube and we spun it in what is called a centrifuge, what we see is all the heavy stuff settles to the bottom of the tube and all the light stuff is at the top. So you end up with this layering system. And when you do this, at the very bottom, you get your red blood cells. And then you get this layer in between, and this is going to have your white blood cells and your platelets. And then you're going to get your plasma at the very top. And what we can see here, and the purpose of collecting the blood and doing this analysis, we can come up with what's called the hematocrit. Oops, there's no E on the end. And the hematocrit is going to be a measure of the percentage of red blood cells. And what we're going to see is that average healthy adult is going to have a hematocrit of about 45% red blood cells, but we do see that this varies with body types. The platelet and white blood cell layer should be about 1%. And here, because of the color, this layer can be called the Buffy coat, if you're interested in that little tidbit of information. And then we're expecting the plasma to be at about 55%. So you see here, the white blood cells and platelets is actually like less than 1%. So it's really not figured into this hematocrit, because you can see we're actually not equaling exactly 100% here. We're going a little beyond. And so again, I think for me, this is highlighting that formed elements is slightly less than half and plasma is slightly more than half. All right, stay tuned for a video looking more details at the plasma. I just looked at my notes. Hang on. Let's add in just a couple more details. Just a couple more details on blood as a whole. Okay, so let's add in that blood is very viscous, which means thick. Blood is very thick. Blood is slightly warmer than body temperature, so it's going to run at an average of about 38 degrees Celsius, or this will be 100.4 degrees Fahrenheit. And this is because of that thickness of blood and because it's moving actively through these small vessels that it is generating some heat. We'll see that our blood will have a pH of about 7.4 with a healthy range of being 7.35 to 7.45. That has shown up in the past as a departmental final exam question. So here again, maybe we don't memorize exactly the pH, although you can. But if we remember that the blood pH is slightly basic, then you'd be able to pick out your answer from a list. And then this last little bit is just kind of a factoid. If you're interested, we'll see that your blood is about 8% of the adult body weight. And depending on your body type and body size, that could be 4 to 6 liters of blood total. Okay, now I'm ready to close this video. Stay tuned for a video on plasma. And as always, take care of yourselves and each other.